Hello, sirs, marms, ladies and gents. Welcome to the update brief. Rapid Support Force, RSF rebels, have conducted 3 days of long-range drone attacks against targets in Port Sudan since 4th of May. They've targeted Sudanese Armed Forces airbase, a major fuel storage site in the port area, a civilian airport, a hotel, and a major electrical substation. As the most recent series of events in an apparently intractable civil war, almost perpetual humanitarian catastrophe, this bears some further examination. Before we go on though, if you want more updates on global events in your feed, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and comment below. So we'll start with a quick introduction on the main actors in the current Sudanese conflict. On one hand, we have the Sudanese army, which has been the de facto government since 2021, when it collaborated with the RSF, its now enemies, to overthrow the civilian-led Transitional Council. This Transitional Council was attempting to chart Sudan's course to something approaching a democracy following the fall of the dictator al-Bashir in 2019. As the government is a military junta, the president is currently Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the chap in the top centre of the screen there, and he's been defending his position against the RSF rebellion since 2023. Given the government's origin in Sudan's conventional military, you should be aware they retain a noteworthy, if not significant, conventional force overmatch against the RSF. Particularly, they retain control of Sudan's vestigial air force, and as a result, they are the only side in the conflict capable of operating manned, fixed or rotary-winged combat platforms, as well as having an infrastructure base more appropriate for the deployment of larger unmanned aerial systems, colloquially drones. Despite a heavily flawed humanitarian record, the government retains a relatively broad base of international support, including formal recognition by the African Union and the majority of Western nations. Most amusingly, it's also received non-trivial military support from both Russia and Ukraine at the same time. Russia is seeking to trade obsolete Russian Soviet military equipment in exchange for naval basing rights in Port Sudan, and Ukraine has been providing some military aid to Sudan to hunt down members of the Wagner group, and also, somewhat surprisingly, has actually received military aid from Sudan, again with a lot of the ex-Soviet military equipment. On the flip side then, we also have the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF were a paramilitary organisation who were founded to act as a bolster to the Sudanese armed forces in times of internal strife. They have an extensive and horrifically violent history in the Darfur War, which raged until the mid-2010s, although that's not particularly relevant today. More recently, they were engaged extensively in 2021 in support of the military coup against the Transitional Council, and served bloody enthusiasm to suppress anti-coup protests. This track record of gleeful and wanton violence against civilians earned the RSF a seat at the table within the newly formed military junta. To the surprise of absolutely no one, this lovely little anti-democratic family fell apart in 2023. This collapse was instigated basically by the efforts to integrate the RSF into the conventional armed forces, and unsurprisingly, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, reacted poorly to these actions to dilute or dissolve his power base. As a result, the RSF returned to their natural state of being, which is committing grotesque atrocities against civilians with the secondary effort of waging a war. As we've sort of alluded to, civil wars are never purely internal matters, so naturally enough the RSF has its own relatively tight slate of international supporters and enablers. These include the UAE, who provide weapons and military equipment, Ethiopia, which, broadly speaking, does anything it can do to undermine Egypt's regional standing, and Egypt is supporting the armed forces, so Ethiopia is supporting the RSF, and Chad, which broadly has a sort of passive effect of providing a permissive environment for RSF recruitment, which is enabled by tribal links and poverty in Chad, which makes going to war in Sudan look like an appealing career move. There's also suggestions that Kenya supports the RSF, to perhaps a lesser extent, less militarily, but the RSF regularly holds summits or conferences in Kenya, including a recent one where it sought to formalise the establishment of a shadow government. I don't know how you formalise an informal government, but, go figure. Separate to the support of nation states, the RSF also has ties to the private military company formerly known as Wagner Group, and now properly called the Afrika Korps, because the Russians are just straight up cosplaying Nazis right now. Their presence raises an interesting conflict given the Russian government proper is supporting the Sudanese government. However, as relatively easily explained, the Afrika Korps' motive is just a continuation of their sell what you capture business model, which they've been implementing elsewhere across the continent. And this has the beneficial side effect for both themselves and the Russian government of giving the state access to foreign currencies and commodities which they may otherwise be denied through sanctions. It is most likely the RSF's connection to the UAE is most relevant to today's brief, as they are the most likely source of modern one-way attack drones. So, what's actually happened? Well, when I started writing this, it looked like it was a standalone attack on an ammunition depot and is currently going bigger than Ben-Hur. So, starting from the top, between 0330 and 0730 local time on 4th of May, 11 fixed-wing, one-way attack drones were launched against targets in Port Sudan. As you can see on the map, primarily targeting the Osman Dinga Air Base, which is the red box just south of Port Sudan itself on the map. This attack almost certainly struck the on-site ammunition depot, causing we'll get on to what it caused. The Sudanese Armed Forces spokesman, who gave a statement relating to the attack, reported both some and all of the one-way attack drones were shot down, and also that only scattered explosions had occurred on the base. This differs somewhat from independent sources, who do report seeing a number of drones shot down. Different sources average about 7 of the 11 reportedly launched, but these reports differ significantly in terms of the damage assessment. An AFP journalist reported a single large explosion shook his house 20 kilometres to the north of the airbase, and I've been in sufficient proximity to things in life that I can tell you for a fact I would not describe an explosion I could feel 20k away as scattered. From this, I think our Sudanese army spokesman is taking a leaf out of the book of Russian air defence, in which critical infrastructure is used to intercept attacking weapons by selflessly placing itself between the drone and the target area of land. Otherwise, perhaps someone was coincidentally and carelessly smoking in the ammunition depot at the time the drones flew over. As a result of this attack and the detonations inside the airbase, the main road into Port Sudan was closed for the majority of the 4th of May. Additional forces were reallocated to the presidential compound, and security posture was changed to other military bases inside the city. And this is a rational reaction to an attack like this as you're preparing to deal with perhaps a follow-on attack or a more complicated endeavour on behalf of the RSF. On the 5th of May, another drone attack struck what has been described as fuel storage near to or south of the port, leading to the large fire that was shown on the first slide. Given the ambiguity of descriptions and photos to date, I've highlighted the 2 best candidate locations on the map in yellow. One, as you can see, is significantly south of the city. The other is in the port itself. By the time you are watching or listening to this, entirely likely you'll be able to get a better geofix than I've been able to yet. Then, on the 6th of May, further strikes were reported at the civilian airport, which is the airport highlighted in red further south, as well as a hotel and a major electrical substation, which caused wide power outages throughout the city. I've not yet managed to confirm the name of the hotel or the location of the substation at this time, so they are not displayed on the map. So we now move on to quickly having a look at who our culprits might be, in the sense of the systems used to conduct the attack. I've not seen any pictures or video of the drones in flight, but I have found these images, and they seem to show a relatively simple fixed-wing, one-way attack design. Again, I've not managed to identify them yet, but it looks to follow the sort of floor plan of a scaled-down Shaheed, which is to say it's a small fixed-wing chassis driven by a piston-engined pusher propeller, as you can see at the back, and space up front for payload and navigation system. Hard to say exactly what the extent of the payload on these systems is. I would estimate in the region of a low single-digit number of kilos of explosive, and reasonably likely that drones of this type will be launched by either a rail or catapult system that you could probably pull out the back of a truck. Given what we know about the geography of the attack and the effects of the attack, it is entirely likely that these are authentic images and they match the effect we've seen. So, moving on to geography. Let's get a sense of it. So on screen now you can see Sudan. I've borrowed this map from Wikipedia. Thank you very much. Great free resource. Support Wikipedia, everyone. And it's got the current front lines approximately marked. This isn't a Ukraine-style war, so these front lines are not clearly delineated by trenches on the ground, and they should be considered porous and a sort of best indicative at best. On top of the map, I've overlaid 2 red circles and an arrow, which illustrate Port Sudan in the top right and Khartoum in the centre. The line linking these illustrates the shortest possible route of these drones, assuming they were launched from identified and known RSF territory. That line covers a distance of some 675 kilometres. There's a realistic prospect the attack was actually conducted at longer range in order to keep the launch teams away from the immediate front line around Khartoum. On the flip side, there is an extant but remote possibility that the attack was launched at shorter range, potentially covertly from a location closer to Port Sudan. However, this remains a remote possibility, as to launch a 4-hour-long volley of one-way attack drones covertly inside hostile territory would almost certainly come with an unacceptable risk to the launch teams. We can look at some of the recent events that have happened which may have contributed to the RSF's decision to launch this attack. So, start with the big picture. As you can see, Frontline divides the country, leaving the Sudanese armed forces in control of the majority of the centre of the country, the north, and the east. The RSF has its strongholds in north and western Kordofan, elements of South Kordofan, and the majority of Darfur region. The recent changes to this situation essentially began in February 2025. You see the blue circle marked on the map. That's a town called El Obeid. This town is a major stronghold on the ground line of communication into Darfur and the rest of the country. The RSF failure to maintain that siege or capture the town has now left them with significantly exposed supply lines when trying to access the rest of the country, increasing the vulnerability of their logistics and reducing their freedom to operate. Further, in March 2025, the RSF were evicted from Khartoum proper, as you've seen in the red circle where the attack may have been launched from, and they now retain only limited positions on the outskirts of the city. As a result, the Sudanese armed forces now dominate Sudan's major population centres, denying RSF access to these critical locations. This, in turn, is highly likely to increase RSF's reliance on their cross-border supporters. These two events are just the recent examples of the tide beginning to turn more decisively against the RSF and its ability to contest major population areas. While a regression away from sort of pseudo-conventional warfare to an insurgency remains viable, the smaller their effective territory or control of population is, the less they will be able to influence events in Sudan or control access to resources. This in turn makes the RSF a much less attractive proposition to their international backers. Exactly at the moment they're going to become more dependent on those supporters for their survival. On the flip side, since the outbreak of conflict, Port Sudan has become the pseudo-capital, as the government and large numbers of internally displaced persons have fled to the city from across the rest of the country, escaping the violence. The city has developed into an epicenter of military governance and international humanitarian operations in support of that internationally recognised government. Together, these set up a situation where the RSF needs to make a statement that it remains credibly able to take a fight to its enemy, and puts them in a position where what better way is there to make that statement than conducting a long-range attack into an area where the Sudanese armed forces believe they're safe. A city, indeed, which until the 4th of May remained almost untouched by conflict. The airbase and ammunition depot within it are obviously appropriate targets, and the realistic loss of significant munition stocks in the explosion we discussed earlier could even have a tangible effect of reducing the pressure felt by RSF fighters on the front line. However, the other targets struck, the fuel storage is one of many fuel storage sites in the port, hitting a hotel. It's unclear if the hotel was intentional or a miss. We don't know if anything was located in that hotel. And also the strike of a single substation suggests that the aim of this attack has a number of non-tangible effects as well. A mushroom cloud appearing over your ammo and fuel storage has a significant kinetic impact, but strikes against the other targets clearly undermine the government's implicit promise to provide security to its population, and consequently the Sudanese government's legitimacy. We can also consider the international backers. Unsurprisingly, international supporters have gathered around Port Sudan for the same reason as IDPs. It is the comparatively low-risk area of the country. The RSF's now demonstrated ability to conduct persistent precision fires into the area may compel some of those backers to review their risk calculus, possibly up to the extent of withdrawing some elements of their support. However, I think this is more likely to backfire in that an investment in further air defence for the Sudanese armed forces would probably be cheaper than extracting foreign supporters from that area, particularly as we've seen with Ukraine. Drones of this type are incredibly vulnerable to even the most basic of anti-aircraft systems, including the classic machine gun strapped to the back of a Hilux. So the final thing I think is of interest in this attack is the protracted nature, at least of the initial volley, and now, to be fair, of the follow-on strikes too. The initial attack was a wave of 11 drones over 4 hours. This is, relatively speaking, a drip feed, and I think it reflects the RSF's relatively limited capacity to deploy these systems. The received wisdom is that the most effective way to use drones of this type is to form them into a coherent wave with the maximum number of drones converging on the target at the same time. This increases the chance of the attack overwhelming defences through sheer mass, and this mass is the strongest argument for the use of these types of drones as opposed to more exquisite systems, if certain parties have those available. The fact the RSF were unable to deliver this mass suggests they have a relatively limited launch and operational infrastructure at present. There is an alternative interpretation, though, and that is that the long duration of the attack was intentional in order to maximise the duration of disruption to the airbase and the nearby civilian airport. Given the Sudanese armed forces' relatively embryonic air defence capability, longer-term disruption could be balanced against the marginally increased odds of shoot-downs of the drones spread over a longer period. Irrespective of which of these final interpretations you pick, it is clear that the RSF remains a significant military threat, even as it is driven out of Sudan's major population areas. What happens next will, likely, be in no small part down to the RSF's international backers, and whether they have the will or resource to go all in to stop the bleed on the battlefield, or to cut their losses and seek alternate opportunities to influence Sudan. Thank you for listening. I hope I've left you with a better understanding of what's going on in one of the world's most persistent yet underreported trouble spots. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check the sources in the description below, like the video, subscribe to my channel, and please comment below with any questions. Cheers, goodbye.